Every fall and every spring for decades, we've all been trained to think about the same stretch of the country when we hear the word tornado, that classic strip running through Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, the Texas Panhandle, what everybody calls Tornado Alley. Well, the data researchers have been compiling over the last several years is telling a very different story now, and if you live in Illinois, this is one you need to sit down and pay attention to, because the map is shifting, and it's shifting toward you. Thank you for joining me. Let's get right into this because I think it's one of the more important stories we can cover on this channel, not because it's flashy, but because it directly affects how prepared people in this region need to be. And a lot of folks in Illinois still think of themselves as being on the edge of tornado activity rather than right in the middle of it, and that thinking needs to change. Let's start with the history here so we understand what we're actually comparing this to. For decades, the traditional tornado alley that stretched through the southern and central plains was where the bulk of the country's most violent tornado activity was concentrated. And that made sense given the atmospheric setup out there. You've got dry air coming off the Rockies, you've got moist air pushing up from the Gulf of Mexico, and when those two air masses collide along a boundary out in that open plains terrain, you get exactly the kind of instability and wind shear that produces significant tornadoes. That's the textbook explanation. And for a long time, that's where most of the country's attention, most of the research funding, and most of the public awareness efforts were focused. But here's what's been happening, and this isn't speculation. This is based on peer-reviewed research looking at decades of tornado report data. The frequency of significant tornado activity in that traditional plains corridor has actually been trending downward in a lot of studies, while at the same time, activity across parts of the Midwest and the Mid-South, including Illinois, Indiana, parts of Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, has been trending upward. Researchers have started referring to this eastward shifted zone informally as Dixie Alley for the southern portion. But what I want you to understand is that this isn't just a southern story anymore. The data shows this increased activity reaching right up into Illinois, and that's exactly why I wanted to break this down for you today. Let's talk about why this matters so much specifically for Illinois, because I don't want this to just be an abstract statistic. I want you understanding the real-world implications. Illinois sits in a geographic spot that's always had tornado potential. We know that. We've seen destructive tornadoes in this state before, but historically, a lot of the public perception and honestly a lot of the preparedness messaging in this country has been built around that classic plains alley, and that's left states like Illinois somewhat underprepared relative to the actual risk on the ground. When the data shows increasing activity in a region, but the public perception hasn't caught up yet, that's a dangerous gap, and that gap is exactly what I want to help close today. Now let's talk about why this shift might actually be happening. Because there are a few different factors researchers point to, and I want to walk through them honestly, including where there's still some debate. One factor that comes up frequently is a change in the position and behavior of the jet stream and the associated moisture transport patterns coming up from the Gulf of Mexico. If the atmospheric setup that used to favor that classic plains corridor is shifting further east, even by a modest amount, that changes where the ingredients for tornado formation, moisture, instability, wind shear line up most consistently. And several studies looking at decades of severe weather reports have found exactly that kind of eastward trend. Another factor that gets discussed is soil moisture and land use changes across the plains. Some researchers have looked at how large-scale irrigation and changes in agricultural practices across parts of the plains may have altered local moisture and heating patterns enough to have a modest effect on where thunderstorm development is most favored. This is one of those areas where the research is still developing, and I want to be upfront with you. Scientists don't have one single, fully agreed upon explanation for every piece of this shift. What they do have is decades of consistent tornado report data showing the trend itself, even if the exact combination of causes is still being studied and debated. I also want to mention the broader conversation around a changing climate, because this does come up in a lot of the research on shifting severe weather patterns. Some studies suggest that a warming atmosphere, which can hold more moisture, may be altering the traditional overlap zone between dry western air and moist Gulf air in ways that favor this more eastward risk area. I want to be careful here and give you the honest picture. Tornado climate science is genuinely one of the more difficult areas to draw firm, long-term conclusions from, because tornadoes are small-scale, short-lived events compared to something like a hurricane, and that makes long-term trend data harder to pin down with full certainty compared to some other weather phenomena. But the shift in where significant tornado activity is being reported, that part is well documented across multiple independent studies, and Illinois sits right in the zone that's seeing that increase. Now let's talk about what makes tornadoes in this shifted zone, this Midwest and Mid-South region, including Illinois, particularly dangerous compared to what people picture when they think of a classic plains tornado, because there are some real differences here that matter for how you prepare. First, terrain and visibility. Out on the open plains, you often have wide open flat terrain, which means storm spotters and everyday residents can frequently see a tornado coming from a significant distance, giving people more visual warning on top of whatever official warning has been issued. In Illinois and across a lot of this eastward shifted zone, you've got more trees, more hills in certain areas, more development, and that means tornadoes can be much harder to see coming. Sometimes they're wrapped in rain, sometimes they're simply obscured by tree lines or by nightfall. And that visibility difference is a real factor in how much reaction time people have. Second, and this is a big one, nighttime tornado risk. Research looking at this shifted activity zone has found a notably higher percentage of tornadoes occurring overnight compared to the classic plains corridor. Nighttime tornadoes are significantly more dangerous for one simple reason. Most people are asleep. They're not watching the radar. They're not seeing the sky darken. And unless they have a reliable way to receive warnings while sleeping, whether that's a weather radio, a phone alert, or something similar, they can be caught completely off guard. If you're in Illinois, I cannot stress this enough, having a way to receive severe weather alerts overnight is not optional in this kind of environment. It needs to be part of your basic safety setup, the same way you'd have a smoke detector. Third, housing and structure vulnerability. A lot of research into tornado fatalities has pointed to manufactured and mobile homes as being disproportionately represented in tornado-related deaths, largely because these structures simply don't hold up the same way more traditional stick-built homes do. And this matters for our conversation today because parts of this shifted risk zone, including areas of Illinois, have a meaningful amount of manufactured housing. If that describes your living situation, I want you to have a plan now before severe weather is in the forecast for where you'd go for better shelter, whether that's a sturdy neighbor's home, a community shelter, or another safe location, because waiting until a tornado warning is issued to figure that out is not the time. Let's also talk about population density and urban sprawl, because this is another piece of why this shift is such a significant concern. As cities and suburban areas across this region have expanded over the decades, more people and more structures now sit in areas that would have been open farmland decades ago. That means a tornado track that might have crossed mostly rural land in the past now has a higher chance of crossing through populated neighborhoods. And that increases the potential for both damage and, unfortunately, casualties when a significant tornado does occur in this region. Now, let's talk specifically about Illinois' tornado history for a moment, because I think it helps to ground all of this in real, documented events, rather than just statistics and trends. Illinois has experienced some genuinely devastating tornadoes over the years. Some of the deadliest tornado events in United States history have touched this state. And those events serve as a stark reminder that this is not new territory in terms of raw risk. What's changing is the frequency and the broader pattern of activity, meaning events like these may become less of a rare exception and more of a recurring seasonal reality for this region going forward. Let's talk about timing too, because tornado season in Illinois doesn't look exactly like tornado season in the classic Plains corridor. In the traditional Plains alley, the peak season tends to concentrate heavily in the spring months. Across this shifted Midwest and Mid-South zone, research has shown a broader and sometimes more year-round pattern of significant tornado activity, including a secondary peak in the fall months in parts of this region. And that matters, because it means residents in Illinois shouldn't just be thinking about severe weather awareness in April and May. They need to carry that awareness through a longer stretch of the year than folks might traditionally expect. So let's talk about what all of this means practically, because I don't want to just lay out concerning data without giving you something actionable to walk away with. That's not what this channel is about. We always come back to safety and preparedness. First, take warnings seriously every single time, regardless of the time of day or the time of year. Given everything we've just talked about, the increased nighttime risk, the broader seasonal window, the reduced visibility in more wooded and developed terrain, you cannot afford to treat a tornado warning in this region the same way someone out in open plains country might, where they can step outside and visually confirm what's happening. In Illinois, by the time you can see it, it may already be too late to get to safety. So the warning itself needs to be your trigger to act, not visual confirmation. Second, have a reliable way to receive alerts overnight. I mentioned this already, but I want to repeat it because it's genuinely one of the most important pieces of this entire conversation. A weather radio with a tone alert, or phone notifications that you know will wake you up. This needs to be part of your setup, especially during active, severe weather stretches. Third, know your shelter location before you need it, whether that's a basement, an interior room on the lowest floor, away from windows, or in the case of manufactured housing, a predetermined safe location you can get to quickly. Don't figure this out during the warning. Figure it out now and talk through it with your family. so everyone knows the plan without having to think about it in the moment. Fourth, if you're in an area with more tree cover or hilly terrain where visual spotting is less reliable, lean even more heavily on radar and official warnings rather than trying to visually confirm a tornado yourself. Because, as I mentioned, the obscured visibility that comes with this kind of terrain is part of what makes this shifted risk zone particularly dangerous. And fifth, this one's simple, but it matters. Check on your neighbors, especially anyone elderly, anyone with mobility challenges, or anyone in more vulnerable housing. Make sure they've got a way to receive warnings and a plan for where to go. Because in a shifted risk pattern like this, community awareness genuinely saves lives, the same way it does with any severe weather event we cover on this channel. I want to bring this back around to the bigger picture before I wrap up, because I think it's worth reflecting on. For a long time, this country's mental map of tornado risk was built around one specific corridor, and that mental map shaped a lot of things, building codes in some areas, public awareness campaigns, even where certain warning infrastructure was prioritized. What the research is telling us now is that MAP needs an update. The risk hasn't disappeared from the traditional Plains Alley, but it has meaningfully increased across this Midwest and Mid-South corridor. And Illinois sits right in the middle of that shifted zone. That's not something to panic about, but it is absolutely something to take seriously and to plan for, the same way we'd plan for any other kind of severe weather threat on this channel. So here's what I want you to take away from all of this. The data increasingly shows tornado activity trending eastward, away from the traditional Plains Alley, and into a broader zone that includes Illinois. This shifted activity comes with some added dangers: more nighttime tornadoes, reduced visibility due to terrain and tree cover, and a longer active season than people might traditionally expect. The response to all of this isn't fear, it's preparation, having a reliable way to get warnings, especially overnight, knowing your safe location ahead of time, and making sure the people around you, especially anyone more vulnerable, have a plan too. This is exactly the kind of story I want to keep bringing to this community, not just the storms bearing down on us right now, but the bigger patterns shaping what we all need to be prepared for going forward. Because staying informed about how these risks are shifting is just as important as tracking any single storm on the map. Thank you so much for watching this one. If you're in Illinois or anywhere across this shifted risk zone, please take this seriously, get your warning systems in place, talk to your family about your plan, and check on your neighbors, especially anyone who might not have seen this information yet. We'll get through these severe weather seasons the way we always do, informed, prepared, and looking out for each other. I'll see you in the next update.